Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming back and joining me. My name's Kim, and you're at Kim's Cozy Corner, and we are going to do some work in the kitchen today. We have some processing to do. I have potatoes that need to be put into a different state. I have onions that are coming up, so we're going to process some of those today. We're also going to make some beef broth. I have some beef bones here. We're going to take care of that beef broth. I need to slice up some cheese. I buy all of my cheese from Azure Standard and I buy it in big 5-pound blocks. I'm going to take some of that. We're going to slice it up. I also have some winter squash that I'm going to puree and can. We got a busy day. Come with me. With everything we have to do, the question is, where do we start? I think the first thing that we need to do is to get the beef broth started because that's the longest process that we have to worry about today. And I buy all of my beef from a local farmer. And when I buy my beef, I like to get all of the bones. I want to use as much of that cow as I can because you pay a lot of money for it. And so I always ask for the bones, and I usually just get soup bones. So I have 2 containers here of beef bones, and they call them beef soup bones. And I just keep them frozen until I got time to deal with them. And I already had quite a bit of beef broth. So I want to take care of those beef soup bones. But the lady says, hey, you really should get the beef shank as well. Now, I don't know much about shanks. I believe there's going to be quite a bit of meat left over on these beef shanks. Actually, it's very meaty. I don't know if I want to do the shanks or not. I'm going to take the shanks back and I'm going to go get the bone marrow instead, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I had 2 containers of the bone marrow. So we're going to do 1 bone marrow, and I'm sure there's going to be some good juices coming from this. And I have these big soup bones, which are already going to have a ton of meat coming out of those. So I didn't think the shanks was a good combination. Just it's going to be too much lean meat, and we weren't going to be able to eat it. So we will start with these 3, and I am going to use my roaster oven to slowly cook this down so I can get the most rich bone broth. So let's do that. So I will be using my Nesco roaster oven. I don't remember how many, 18 quarts. It's an 18-quart roaster oven. And making bone broth is so easy. I mean, I'm saying bone broth, but beef bone broth, or making beef stock or beef broth. All of those things work. It just depends on how rich you want to make your broth, and do you add any additional flavorings with herbs and spices and things of that nature. Today, I am making just a very simple broth because honestly, I don't have the patience to do it right now, but I need to empty my freezer because I just ordered another whole hog. So I buy my pork from a local farmer as well. And we just put our order in. I know that's going to be here very soon. And we need to clean my freezer out. Now, I have a family of, and I've always said 6, that I have a family of 6. So there's my mother who lives with me, my 2 young children, and I have an adult daughter who used to live just up the road from me. So when I cooked, I was cooking for her as well. And my sister used to live with me for a period of time, but she's now moved. And so it's really just the 4 of us now. So they live in other states, so it's not like they're going to sneak up on me and try to join me for dinner or anything like that. So when I'm cooking now, I am truly only cooking for 4. So when I think about how I preserve my food, how much food I need to preserve, I am thinking about preserving and having enough food for 4. So my meals are a lot smaller these days. So I have all of the beef out of the packaging, mostly. There's a little bit of paper on here from where they wrapped it up that's still frozen. And so once it starts warming up, I'll peel that off in the process. Now, I mentioned that I buy all of my beef from a local farmer, but what I didn't tell you is that my beef is grass-fed and grass-finished, which means they were on pasture the whole time. They were not grain-fed throughout their life. And it definitely had to go get my water. And it definitely changes the taste. I mean, grass fed, grass finished beef is a far superior taste than grain fed meat. If you don't believe me, give it a try and tell me what you think about it. So, anyway, I have all of my beef in here, and I am going to add some water, which is what I was feeling why I had to step away. I think I put just a teeny little bit more because I am going to slowly cook this all day and maybe all night before I get ready to can this up. So I'm gonna put just a little bit more. Now that looks about right. So I filled my 18-quart roaster up within an inch or so-ish of the top. Now, remember I said there's some of that packing paper still wrapped around my meat, which I will definitely get off. I'm not going to let it cook, for hours and hours. Look, it's coming off now. So let's do that now. Let's get it off before I forget. At the end of the day, we will strain all of the broth before we can it. So we'll make sure there's nothing in it that shouldn't be in it. And let me get this off. Make sure I'm not leaving any behind. Look, that peeled right off. Look at that. So now that I have all of the paper off, I'm going to try to put as much of the meat under the water as possible. This is a pretty big cut here, this one here. So we'll just keep flipping it over, and I'm sure the meat will fall off of it and it'll all be up under the water soon. But the longer you cook your broth, the richer and deeper the taste will be. Okay, I had to wash my hands. You gotta keep a clean kitchen. That's the most important thing. When you're cooking, you need to keep a clean kitchen. So we're gonna get this plugged up. We're gonna turn this on and we're gonna cook it very slow because I'm not gonna pay any attention to it all day. I need it to do what it needs to do without me. So I'm gonna be somewhere around 275 right now. I'll maybe turn it up later. Throughout the day, depending on how fast I want this process to move. But this is a set it, forget it. And when we come back, hopefully the only thing that we'll need to do is can it up. Now, you could season your broth, salt, pepper, herbs, all of that kind of good stuff. You can throw in onion peels and carrot peels and all that kind of stuff, strain it off, and then you'll have more of a vegetable beef type broth. I don't feel like doing that today, y'all. Today, I'm going to make some simple broth. I might put some salt and pepper in it a little later down the road. But for now, water, beef bones. That's it for this process for now. Let's work on something else. The next thing that we're going to work on is this winter squash. So let me start by turning my oven on. I tell you what, let's not turn the oven on. We are going to hold off. Y'all, it is only, what is it? 6:30 in the morning, and my house is still asleep. So we will hold off, but we will prep this. So my winter squash, this is Australian butter squash. That's the name. I purchase it from Azure Standard when I don't grow enough of my own. And I did grow, I think four of these in my garden this past season, which honestly, I believe is enough for my family. But I couldn't pass it up. I was ordering from Azure. I saw it, and it's not something they have in stock all the time. So I definitely said, I better get this. Now, the bad thing is I got it, and then my house went so chaotic that it was in my refrigerator. I never processed it, and it's got some bad spots on it. And I'm hoping we can save it. I'm hoping we can save it. Yeah, I'll have to cut away some of these bad spots, but that's fine. We'll get the bad spots cut away. There's some little bad spots here on the end. We will cut that away, and anything that's no good, cut it away. And then we're going to put the rest of it in a pan so that we can roast it in the oven. Let's see how much of it we can save. So let's just set this here. Australian butter squash, for those who don't know much about it, or if you haven't heard that particular brand or that type, it tastes like sweet potatoes to me, y'all. I love it. I had never heard of it before, and I'm not a big fan of pumpkin. I don't like pumpkin. Pumpkin to me has an aftertaste that I just don't like. It starts off great, and then it ends with a taste that I really don't like. So don't like pumpkin. So I tried this, and I made it the same way I would a sweet potato pie, and never told my family any different. And they ate it and they loved it. They thought they were eating sweet potato pie. Oh, they just kept telling me how good that sweet potato pie tasted. It was winter squash. So that's how I fell in love with it. And I grew some. And like I said, it did okay. I don't think I had enough plants growing though. So we're going to grow more of this next year for sure. And we will get to the point where I don't have to do this. I also saved some seeds. So saving the seeds hopefully will get me to a point where I don't even have to purchase from Azure. So I'm checking it to make sure there are no soft places, and I'm cutting away anything that's soft. And unfortunately, there's a lot of soft places. So hopefully we can save most of this. Oh, so that's good. Now this is good meat right here. We will save that. Once I have this roasted, I will scrape it away from the skin, and I typically freeze it. But today, I think I'm going to can it. I'm going to can it like a pumpkin puree, you know, the same way you think about pumpkin that you buy in a can. So when I'm ready to make a pie or something, I can pull that jar out, freeing up room in my freezer for meat. And it still should be fine. It should be perfect. Now this is perfect. Perfect, perfect. All right, let's work on this other end. And this is the one that looks pretty nasty. Let's see if we can save it. Okay, we're getting somewhere. Most of it's okay. And I've had this in my refrigerator probably over a month, y'all. But it's winter squash, right? It lasts a long time. But it had already been cut. If it was still a whole piece of fruit, then I could have just put it down on the shelf and it would have lasted many, many months. But it had already been cut into smaller sizes for sale, because these things are very dense. Dense, dense, very dense. I think 1/2 of this was like 3 pounds, just on half of it. And I think they sell them in roughly 3-pound quantities. So you don't know exactly the quantity you're going to get. You know it's going to be close to 3 pounds. Okay. All right. The process that I'm doing now is scraping them out. And I do this even if I didn't have those bad spots on it. The seed cavity, I always give it a good scrape. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm not trying to get damage off now. I think I've cut all the damage away already. All right. That one looks good as well. So this is our roasted Australian butter squash, better known as squash that tastes like sweet potatoes. So we're going to put this in the oven and we're going to roast it probably for about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, because it's going to be slow and low. But I'm not going to start it this early in the morning. I'm going to just have it ready to go. It'll be prepped. The next time you see me though, I will be holding this and it will be roasted. The next thing we need to do, y'all, we got some peeling to do. I need to peel all of these potatoes and we're going to can the potatoes. And you see they have eyes on them. They are starting to sprout. You see them? They're sprouting. And most of these potatoes are my purple Viking. Now, I harvested these purple Viking, I believe it was in June. I believe. I could be wrong, but June. And it is now December. So for 6 months, roughly 6 months, they have been in storage and they're starting to sprout. So we're going to cut these up. We're going to give them a good blanch and then we are going to just process them. And then I have a few onion that are coming up and we're just going to slice, dice, chop those up and set them to the side. So I'll see you back here in a little bit after I've done some peeling and we'll go through that process next. Now I've done potato processing videos, so I'm not going to talk through each and every step-by-step process for all these different things I'm doing today because I have other videos out there, but I will show you some of the key steps in those processes. I will see you back here again in just a few minutes. Okay, before we move any further, I got to go back. Now, one thing that I always like to talk about on my channel is I like to keep it real. And so my intent for this winter squash was to puree it so I can make pies out of it. And based on what I'm reading in this ball book of preserving and everything else I'm seeing, it says do not mash or puree. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try to follow this recipe a little closer. So I am going to remove the skin off of these and cube it up and do it the same way I would my regular potatoes, my white potatoes. So I have another step to get the skins off. Let's cube this up. And then we need to cook it for about 2 to 5 minutes just to get it warm, but not soft. And then we'll can it. So I got another step. Let's get to that next step. Again, I want to try to preserve it, but I want to do it in a way that's safe. And so I try to follow as closely as possible the ball book of canning. And I did my research and it says do not mash or puree. In every recipe, even if I go to the sweet potato recipe, it says do not mash or puree. So we will not puree this. We will not cook it in the oven. We will follow the directions that are in this book here. So let me get these peeled and cubed. And I had cleaned my mess up, y'all. I was ready to move on to another step. Maybe it's because I hadn't had enough coffee yet. All right, let's see how hard it's going to be. Okay. I think I can do this. This piece is a little skinny, but the other pieces should be pretty easy. Now, I may have been able to do this with my vegetable peeler, but at this point, I'm not going back. We're going to keep down this path we're on. Okay, I got the skins off, and now I need to cube these up. So I'm cubing them in roughly the same size pieces here. Nice chunks here. Now, when I'm ready to use this, at this point now I'm wondering if I'm just going to eat them like yams, where, you know, you just open the jar and put it in the oven, put a little brown sugar on it, and just eat it like yams. That's probably what I'm going to do with these, because I don't want to have to put them in the freezer. The whole point is to clean the freezer out to make room. So with these chunks, we will make yams or something out of them. And I always wanted to make yams out of the winter squash. I didn't want to go through the trouble of having to take the skins off, but since I've done that, these will definitely be yams. But they will be winter squash yams. Just got to get them all to roughly the same size chop. I will get these cut up and I will get back to you so you can see the rest of this process now that the process has changed. Okay, I have all of the squash cut up. We're going to add water and we're going to get it on the stove and we're going to heat it. Once I know the water is nice and warm, we're going to heat it for about 3 minutes, just to be honest with you, just to get it warm. There we go. Get our stove turned on. And I want the water to get warm first. Once I know the water's warm, then that's when I'll start counting down for my 3 minutes. The water's warm. It's been heating up now for about 3 minutes. So we're going to go ahead and transfer it to the jars. I am going for 1.5 pint jars. Now I don't want the water from the squash because we're going to put fresh hot water on them. I know I have at least 2 of these, but we're going to stuff them a little better than this in just a moment. Let me try to get as much in there as possible first. Got to make sure we leave our head space in there. So we're actually pressure canning today. We are not water bath canning. This is pressure canning. I'm using my digital Presto canner. It's going to be 3.5 pint jars. And for a family of 4, where there's only 3 people eating it, my one daughter does not like yams. So there will be 3 of us eating it. 1.5 pint jar is plenty. There they are, 3.5 pint jars. Now I need to fill these jars up with boiling water and leaving 1-inch headspace. So let's do that next. So we are adding boiling water to each of the jars, leaving 1 inch of headspace. The next thing we need to do is get all of the air bubbles out. So I put my chopstick in. I'll go around the edges of the jar, just loosening it up. So if there's air bubbles in there, now I fill these jars all the way up, at least I thought they were all the way up with water. And you can already see that the water level has dropped as I've removed air bubbles. So I'm going to need to add a little more boiling water while I'm waiting on that water to boil. Because I was out of boiling water. I'll go ahead and wipe the rims. I have a couple jars that need just a tad bit more water. I try to keep it real, y'all. I'm not perfect. Oops, that was a little bit too much. Hopefully it'll be all right. Just a tad bit. I use ForJars lids. I usually buy them in bulk when I do buy them because I like to save money, y'all. Get these back in my canner. The lid's on. I filled my jars. So I hit this button to go to the next step, and it is now heating up. And then in a few minutes, it's going to tell me when I need to put my regulator on. So we are good for now. It's going to heat up to pressure. It's going to stay up to pressure for about 10 minutes, I believe, when it'll then tell me to add the regulator. And then we'll count down. So we'll let that process go ahead and get started, and then I will bring you back after they're fully canned. I will bring you back after it's time to work on beef broth. We are now going to work on those potatoes. Okay, we're moving to the next step, and that is us peeling our potatoes and getting those ready to can. And we are going to follow basically the exact same process that we used for the winter squash. We're going to peel them, heat them very briefly over the stove, and then can those right up. And the winter squash is about done, so we'll pull that out and put this right in. So we are just moving right along. And they're coming up, so if I want them to preserve, if I want to keep them for any amount of time without them going bad, I'm going to have to change the form that I'm preserving them in. So I am going to, let's see, yeah, we're going to use the vegetable peeler today. Sometimes I just use a regular little knife to peel them because I have nothing else to do. I just sit here and peel and contemplate on life. But today we will use the vegetable peeler. And these are a little bigger. If they were smaller, I probably would just get the paring knife out. And so I am just going to take care of this process. And we're going to cut them up into bite-sized pieces. And if you are canning potatoes, one of the things that you need to be aware of is that they will brown on you. They will brown on you as soon as you peel them if you don't soak them in water. So I have a bowl of cold water here. I'm going to cut these potatoes down into chunks, bite-sized chunks, and put them in the water. And that's all we're going to do with all the potatoes I have here. So I will do that, and I will bring you back and show you the next step. But we are going to preserve this harvest so we don't lose it. It's been 6 months since these potatoes came out the ground, which is pretty awesome, by the way. It's pretty awesome. I want to maintain my year's supply, so we can't lose them. I used to be worried that I wouldn't like canned potatoes. I know I don't typically like the ones from the grocery store. And so when I first started canning potatoes, I was really, really worried about the taste, the texture, all of that kind of stuff. But I'm going to be honest with you, I have eaten my canned potatoes now for, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years, and no issues whatsoever. Now, my potatoes still are quite dirty, so we will have to wash them really well before we start cooking them and canning them and all that kind of stuff. So yes, there are dirt on these, but we will get them washed up, cleaned up, and cooked. Y'all, I don't put I put the vegetable peeler down. Look, and I don't went to the knife. I'm sorry. The knife is just more comfortable. I'm old school, y'all. This is how I've always done it. I didn't have all these fancy gadgets back in the day. And so the fancy gadgets make me a little uncomfortable. It doesn't feel natural to me yet. But I'm going to hand peel these. It's going to be just as fast. So we'll hand peel because that's what I'm more comfortable with. All right, let me get to working, and I'll bring you back when we move to the next step. Okay, potatoes are all cut. They're clean. I have them in cold water. I'm going to get them on the stove here. And on the stove, I'm going to put them in cold water as well. And we're going to do the exact same thing. We are going to heat this water up. Only going to cook the potatoes for maybe 5 minutes at most. We don't want them soft. We just want them warm. So we'll do that now. So while the potatoes are heating up, let's get the winter squash out of the canner. So if we look at these cans here, you can see either I had siphoning in this jar right here because my water level is down, or I had air bubbles inside this jar. So when I sealed it, the water settled because there were air bubbles in there. But based on looking at the water in my canner here, I see some orange in the water, which means that was siphoning. So I had siphoning in these two jars here, and then this jar did just fine. Okay, so this is the winter squash. Okay, according to the Ball Book of Canning, for white potatoes, it says that I am supposed to hot pack, which that's what we're doing, and I need to process quart jars for 40 minutes. Everything else is exactly the same with the exception of the amount of time that we're going to process them. So I have the potatoes ready to go. All right, so we have our jars. Let's get them filled. And I actually meant to put salt in these. So I'm going to go back and put a teaspoon of salt in each one of these jars. Now a little bit more. I'm going to have another jar over here. Look at this. I did all that stuffing for nothing. I had another jar right there. A whole jar full of potatoes. Top off these jars. Leave a an inch of headspace. So the jars are in the pressure canner and we're going to bring it up to pressure for 10 minutes and then we will start the countdown of 40 minutes. I ended up with 3-quart jars and 1-pint jar and it needs to process for 40 minutes and then it's got to cool down for a little bit, but that's it for the potatoes. So at this point, I will bring you back when the potatoes are done, and then the only thing left to process is the broth. So we will be back. Okay, everybody, I made an executive decision on my beef broth. I decided I'm in the kitchen, I might as well make this beef broth right. So I went ahead to put the vegetables in the beef broth. So let me show you what I did. I now have in my beef broth some shredded carrots that I had in the refrigerator that were about to go bad. I have frozen celery and I had some onion that were about to go bad. So I'm like, why not put that in my broth? So I now have the vegetables in the broth. I also added a couple bay leaves in the back there and I'm going to give it a good stir. And then this broth is going to cook for 4 or 5 hours so it can be nice and rich. Now, when I say 4 or 5 hours, I mean 4 or 5 more hours because it's already been cooking for about 5 or 6 hours already. Basically, I'm going to cook this broth all the way up until late tonight, right before I get ready to go to bed. And if it's still not rich enough, it'll cook all night. Good morning. Welcome back. It's the next morning. It's very early morning, but it is the next morning. So let me show you where we are. The potatoes are out. They are canned. They're done. I didn't turn the camera on, but let me show you how they look and how they're doing. I ended up with 3 quarts and 1 pint. They look amazing. I didn't overcook them this time. They did just what they were supposed to do. So they're the potatoes. And if you remember, we did winter squash as well. And now it's time for us to finish up our beef stock or beef broth, whatever you want to call it. But we're going to finish that up now. So let me show you how it looks. And it does look amazing. So here's our beef stock. It's full of all of those vegetables. It's rich. I let it cook all night to really enhance the flavor of the stock. So we will start working through those next steps. Now it's time for us to get this broth out. I need to strain it though, because I got all kinds of bits of everything in there between the carrots and the onion and the celery. There's all kinds of bits, and I believe there's some teeny little bones in there as well from the different types of soup bones that I used. So we're going to strain it. The other thing that's in here is a lot of fat. And so I am going to use my separator to try to remove some of that before I put the stock into the jar. So we got a couple of steps to get to that refined goodness. So we will just start with that. Now I have my jars over there warming and getting them nice and ready. And so we're going to just, let's see if you can see me. I'm going to dip out this goodness. There are bay leaves in here as well. All kinds of goodies in here. And we're going to just strain it to get the big pieces. And I have a lot of broth here. So we're going to have to run the canner a couple of times. It's looking good. Nice. Nice broth, and it smells good too. Now, the one thing that I did not put in my broth was salt. I'm going to put a teaspoon of salt in my broth as I fill my jars. So now I'm going to put it in my oil separator. And you really don't have to do this step. You really don't. I just try not to have a whole bunch of fat in my jars. I just think it looks better. So there's that. The oil's coming to the top. I had to get a little better set up here. Okay. So I've brought 2 jars over. I'm going to put my teaspoon of salt in them. Get salt to the side. And then I'm just going to take my oil separator and I'm going to just release right into the jar. Isn't that pretty cool? And when I get down to that oil level, I'm just going to stop. And we'll discard all of this oil. And I almost got 1 quart perfectly. So let's do this process again. Now this jar can use just a little bit more. Let me give it a minute for that oil to be separating. Now there is a ton of meat in this roaster oven, and we will utilize that meat. I think I'm going to can it for today, but we'll put it on tacos, we'll put it in soups, stews. It won't go to waste. I don't believe in wasting anything around here. Okay. Well, that's the easy way to measure, if nothing else. I have a perfect jar filled, leaving an inch of headspace. We will do the second one. Now I'm going to continue this process for the next 3 quart jars, and then I'll bring you back. All right, now this next step is an extremely important step when you're dealing with stocks because there's so much fat in your stock. You need to do more than just take a dry paper towel and wipe the rims. you need to get that fat off. So I am using distilled vinegar, not distilled, apple cider vinegar. And I am wiping the rims with apple cider vinegar. So if there's any fat on the rims, that vinegar will cut that fat and get it off. If you want a good seal on your jars, you definitely need to make sure there's no fat along the rim. Okay, I have them fingertip tight. Gonna get them in the canner. And I have one jar that's got a little bit of fat at the top. All the rest of these, I think I did a good job. So the jars are filled, the canner is going, and they are going to process for 25 minutes, and then we'll take those out and we'll get another batch in. And I won't show you all the different batches. I will just bring you back when we're finished so you can see the fruits of our labors over the last couple of days. Okay, the canner just stopped. Let me unload the last items from the canner. Okay, let me share with you what I just unloaded from the canner. So I ended up with 9 quarts of beef broth, and it came out awesome. So 9 quarts of beef broth. And then I had some beef, like shredded pieces of beef, pretty lean beef at that. And I canned those up and I got 2 pints of that and I processed it. Now, when you're canning meats, just like your broths, you need to pressure can it. And so I followed the Ball Book of Canning to tell me how long I needed to cook it. And so it's been pressure canning for, I think it's 75 minutes. Yeah, I think it was 75 minutes. Anyway, it's done and it's out. So from those beef bones, I got all of this broth and 2 pint jars of shredded beef. So we've had a solid 2 days in the kitchen and we were able to produce a ton of good, yummy cooking that my family is going to enjoy over the rest of the winter, as well as to carry me over into the spring and summer of next year. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm glad you came along for the video and just to see what Kim's doing at Kim's Cozy Corner during the winter months. So until next time, and I hope there will be a next time, I'll catch you back here again real soon. Bye.